Armenia since 1992. Mainly, we are composed of experts from various fields, and we provide technical assistance to Armenia, to the universities, the government, and the public sector. We have many activities since 1992, and recently our main activities include an invention competition for university students and for young scientists in Armenia to encourage them to create new products, invent new things that are good for the business. And we also have a distance learning program where we find experts from various fields in various parts of the world, and we ask the experts to give seminars online from their computer, and we connect with Armenia, and in Armenia various universities with the students and faculty can see the slides and the speaker and interactively learn about the latest developments in different fields. Just yesterday we had a seminar on network virtualization, which is one of the newest technologies. And there were 3 universities that participated: the American University of Armenia, the Yerevan State University, and the Polytechnic University. We also have activities with the Academy of Sciences, especially the Molecular Biology Institute, where we have established a genetics lab, and to encourage the study of genetics, which is again one of the most important technologies. We also have activities with the Polytechnic University. We're trying to establish there an environmental and energy efficiency lab to help them learn about energy efficiency tools and technologies, and also about the environment, how to protect the environment. And also there are many other kinds of activities that we have. One of our activities obviously is the monthly lectures that we organize in Los Angeles. We are of course looking for experts. If you are an expert, or you know any experts in any field, please let us know. We'll try to contact them and work with him or her. So without further ado, I'd like to first introduce the speaker, but then Mark Shenyan is going to tell you a little bit about the book that he has just recently published. Umit Kurt is a PhD candidate at the Holocaust and Genocide Studies program in the History Department of the Clark University. He has just, I understand, finished his dissertation, and he's going to defend it in a few days, so we wish him good luck. He has written extensively on confiscation of the Armenian properties, the Armenian genocide, and early modern Turkish nationalism and the Armenians of Aintab. He has been published in numerous publications, and he has written a book called Great Hopeless Turkish Race: Fundamentals of Turkish Nationalism in the Turkish Homeland from 1911 to 1916. And he's the editor of Revolt and Destruction of the State from Ottoman Empire to Turkish Republic and Collective Violence. And also the author with Taner Akçam of the book that Mark is going to talk about, The Spirit of the Laws, the Plunder of Wealth in the Armenian Genocide. He taught history at Sabancı and Boğaziçi Universities in Istanbul, and he's a visiting researcher currently in Fresno State University. And I have to also say that whatever ideas or concepts or stories are told during this lecture, the Armenian has nothing to do with it. We are only responsible. ARPA is the only one who's responsible for it.
It was back in 1974 when I read this book, Başa Torikyan, title is The Armenian Question in International Law. This was a definitive book for me that put me on a proper track as far as studies of genocide, Armenian genocide, the whole period, and so on. This is a book done by a legal scholar, a PhD from Oxford University, and he was professor at the UB when I was a student. About 10 years ago, I read this book by Kevork Baljan, professor of law at Montreal University, and his book was done originally in French. His concentration was the properties that Armenians lost post-genocide, and with some legal background to go with it. And now, today's book, The Spirit of Laws. This book is an answer to a question, okay, which I will read in the opening paragraph. And the question was the following. Dear Grant, years ago during an interview you said, what happened to the civilization, the wealth created by thousands of years of society, that is Armenians? Interviewer, to whom did it go? Granting, to whom did it go? This is a matter of fact, is one of the basic issues about which Turkey cannot talk. And he keeps on going. And basically, there are the words of Taner Akçam in here, where he's trying to say that that question is answered comprehensively by this book. What is important for you to know about this book is the following. That this covers a period, an activity, a process, where on one hand, post First World War, at the beginning there was Versailles and the Sevres Treaty, which was never put into action. And then eventually, when the Republican period came up, Lausanne comes into the picture. And during Lausanne negotiations, as the Allies were putting conditions on Turkey, this is important as a background of what you're going to hear the rest of the evening, Turkey domestically was passing laws trying to neutralize it. And this is what, in detail, is uncovered in this book. And I would like to have that background in mind as our lecturer covers the material. Thank you very much for your attention. Umit, it's all yours.
Actually, after this brief lecture, I don't have to talk about the details. Anyway, let's İçimi Türkiye'den olsun. Hepiniz hoş geldiniz. Aranızda olmaktan gerçekten çok mutluyum. Çok heyecanlıyım. Hiç böyle heyecanlanmamıştım daha önce. Yani hemşerimlerin burada. Ben de sizin atalarınızın doğduğu yerde doğdum, büyüdüm. Oralarda ve sizin dedelerinizin, nenelerinizin mahallelerinde gezdim. Oradan da ancak selam getirebiliyorum şimdilik. So hedo hima kiçmi hayran kosin var. Hayran kiçmi kosin var. Pais avelishat haskınam, gartam, takmanem var. Kıntirçi gamen masin. Շատ երջանիկ եմ, շատ սկամ խանդավորություն, հիմա այո, ես նախ և առաջ ձեր հրավերին համար շատ շնորհակալ եմ, սեզի հետ միասին ըլլալ ինձի համար մեծ բարիվ է, շատ կարևոր արարողություն անոր համար. So tışbaqda var, belki anteren veratanam. Today, as Varanchanian nicely drew the general picture, I'm going to be talking about the abundant properties, the so-called abundant properties, and this term was put by the perpetrators of the genocide, the political leaders, basically Union Progress Party leaders, the Young Turks, who promulgated, who formed these laws, and these laws and regulations and all series of laws were also inherited by the Republican rank and file after the Declaration of Republic in 1923. Presentation is going to be a little bit technical because we are going to be talking about laws eventually, which has very cold language, very technical and bureaucratic language, like the Nazis did during the Holocaust as well. So if you don't figure out any kind of technical matter, please ask me during the Q&A session if we will have one. So, in his 1944 book, Access Rules in Occupied Europe, Raphael Lemkin says that the genocide is composite and manifold. That it signifies a coordinated plan of actions aimed at the destruction of the essential foundations of a life of a group. Such actions can, but do not necessarily, involve mass killing. They include considerations that are political, social, legal, intellectual, spiritual, economic, biological, psychological, religious, and moral. Such actions also consider health, food, and nourishment, family life, and the care of children, and birth and the death in relation to genocide and as part of the genocide. The honor and the dignity of peoples and the future of humanity as a world community also need to be taken into account. Collective dispossession, including plunder and spoliation, is only one of the many crimes that accompany and even fortify genocidal policies. The state-orchestrated plunder of Armenian property, for example, immediately impoverished its victims. It was simultaneously a condition for and consequence of the genocide. Or perhaps better said, expropriation and pillaging are important aspects of the political economy of the genocide. Denying Armenians their movable and immovable properties in the 20th century literally cut them off from any possibility of future attachment to their homeland. Despite the widespread incidence of private plunder and corruption, there is no doubt that the seizure of Armenian property was primarily a state-directed process and was closely linked to the development of political economy of the Armenian genocide. What we are talking about is a series of laws, degrees, and complex bureaucratic mechanisms that were devised in the Ottoman-Turkish Republican periods concerning administration of the belongings left behind by the deported Armenians. And these laws and regulations were known as abandoned properties, envali metrike kanunları, ılkel abraknere. Both the CUP and the Republican governments concocted ways of making this illegal process look legitimate by using the legal veil of the law. The confiscation of the Armenian property was linked explicitly with plans for the expulsion of the Armenians as part of a drive towards the creation of a homogeneous ethnic nation state. As in the most of the Anatolia, the physical removal of the Armenians to the Syrian deserts proved decisive in separating them from their property because it was clear that they were not meant to return. There were different reasons behind the mass killings of the Armenians and various specific incentives that prompt actors to become perpetrators of extremely violent acts against Armenians. Among them, the desire to seize Armenian properties was a significant motivating factor, drawing people from different sections of society to participate in the mass destruction of Armenians. Creating a Turkish Muslim bourgeois while appropriating Armenian properties and reducing their status from affluence to non-existence was the primary task of the newly founded nation-state. With regard to CEP policy, Union Progress Party policy, of removing Armenians from economy, a clear legal framework was required for it to be effective. Thus, there was need for an extensive legal and administrative framework to legitimize the theft and the seizure of Armenian property as a part of destruction process itself. The nature of confiscation and plundering of Armenian property relied on a legal and bureaucratic instruments as well as laws. These laws and statutes were known as the Embalime-Türkiye Kanunları. This was the official euphemism, an established term in CUP propaganda used to characterize the expropriation of the Armenians. The abandoned properties laws are perceived as normal and ordinary laws in Turkey, and their existence has never been questioned in this direction. Their considerations as natural is also an answer why the Armenian genocide was denied throughout the history of the Turkish Republic. Analyzing the abandoned properties laws is central to an understanding of the political economy of the Armenian genocide. Regarding the political economy of the Armenian genocide, possessions and the revenues from the sale of Armenian properties during the genocide and after the en masse exodus of the Armenians from the whole Anatolia after 1923 were used for 6 primary purposes. First, the needs of the Muslim immigrants, the creation of a Muslim bourgeois, needs of the army, the government's expenses for the deportations, various government needs, the needs of military organizations. Let me move to details regarding these laws. So, first of all, I would like to talk about the laws and decrees of the Committee of Union and Progress Party period. The regulation of June 10, 1915. This ordinance, consisting of 34 articles, regulated in detailed manner how property and goods left behind by Armenians will be impounded by the state. The first article of this regulation announced that, quote, committees formed in a special manner, unquote, were going to be created for the administration of the immovable property, possessions and the lands being left belonging to Armenians, who are being transported to other places and other matters. So in the law, the word transportation, transport, was passed rather than deportation. The most important of these committees were abandoned property commissions, Embalime-Türkiye Komisyonları, whose powers were regulated by Article 23rd and 24th of this ordinance. The commissions, these commissions, by the way, they were formed in 36 provinces of Anatolia at the time. The commissions were each going to be composed of 3 people, a specially appointed chairman, an administrator, and a treasury official who would work directly subject to Ministry of Interior. The first task for these commissions was to affix their seals to goods and buildings belonging to those being deported and place them under the protection of a suitable official or special committee chosen by the commission. After the kind, quantity, and estimated value of the goods being taken under protection, they were registered in detailed fashion. Together with their owners' names, they were transferred to places like churches, schools, or inns suitable for the use as storehouses. Record books indicating their places of safekeeping were to be prepared. After these procedures, animals and things that might spoil among the movable goods were to be sold at public auction by a committee created by the commission. Their equivalent value was to be surrendered to the accounts of the local treasury, directorate, mal sandığı, in the name of their owner, when this could be ascertained, or if not, in the name of the village or town where the goods were found. Each and every detail they told. The type, quantity, value, original location, purchaser, and the sale price of the goods being auctioned off were to be registered in special record books. I spent 1 year for my dissertation research in the Ottoman archives and trying to reach out these record books. Each and every time I asked this question, the archival just told me, no comment, yorum yok. So these record books are available. We know their presence, that's for sure, but they are concealing their from any research. Article 10 of the ordinance prohibited any transactions concerning the property. So if you receive a deportation decision, if you want to buy your properties, you are not allowed to buy. Sell, sorry. You are not allowed to sell. Even if a power of attorney existed vekalet, as all procedures concerning the properties will have to go through the abandoned property commissions. Here it's possible to ask some extremely simple and ordinary questions here. If what was taking place was an ordinary relocation, why were the Armenians prohibited the right of disposal over their goods? Why should an Armenian not have been able to administer his or her properties while on the road or from the place to which they were sent through a power of attorney or similar means? Why, for example, could they sell their own belongings or transfer them to somebody else? Only one answer exists: the desire to completely destroy the Armenians' economic and cultural existence. This will become more apparent during a combined discussion of Articles 6 and the 22nd of the same regulation published on June 10, 1915. In these two articles, the principle that the equivalent values of the properties of the Armenians would be given to them in the places to which they had gone was repeated. Article 6 contained a decree that, quote, the existing objects, pictures and holy books, unquote, in churches will be surrendered to the people of the village in which the church was found at their new location of the settlement. Article 22nd, after stating the revenues obtained from Armenian properties sold at public auctions or rented out are going to be left to the accounts of the local treasury, mal sandığı, directorate, in the names of their owners, in trust. Added that they are going to be given to the owners according to an announcement which is going to be made later on. However, this never took place. The reason is because the Armenians were going to be considered non-existent. There is no obstacle to reading the June 10, 1915 regulation as the basis for the creation of a legal system suitable for the elimination of the material living conditions of the Armenians, as it took away from them any right of disposal of their own properties. So I will move to liquidation law, temporary law of 26 September 1915 and the regulation of November 8, 1915. So it was the first liquidation law of the Union Progress Party period. So after this law, they start liquidating Armenian movable and immovable properties, and as well as valuable items. The most important steps towards the appropriation of Armenian cultural and economic wealth were September 26 law, consisting of 11 articles, and 25 article regulation of November 8, 1915 regulation. I don't want to get into detail of these regulations and laws actually, but maybe I will just give you a brief glimpse of the content and nature of the law. According to Article 1st of this liquidation law, the commissions were to be established to conduct the liquidation. So there were abandoned property commissions in June 1915. Through this law, they had these commissions turned into liquidation commissions. Just changed the name. And this time, they increased their numbers because they tried to diffuse the liquidation process within the whole Anatolia. Not only 37 vilayets or provinces, but the whole Anatolia, the whole cities, towns, and villages as well. These commissions were to prepare separate reports for each person about the properties and receivable accounts and debts abandoned by actual and judicial persons who are being transported to other places. The courts will conduct the liquidation on the basis of these reports. Article 2nd explains at which institutions the properties will be registered. In order to be liquidated, places like income-producing houses, inns, khanlar, and stores, as well as revenue-producing properties of the pious foundations, will be registered in the name of Pious Foundations Ministry, while remaining properties will be registered in the name of the Finance Ministry. After properties were liquidated, that is to say, after the procedures concerning debts and receivable accounts were concluded, whatever remained was to be returned to their original owners. It was in the law. It was supposed to be returned to their original owners. Another important issue treated in this article is that if lying, fraud, or collusion occurred in property transfer transacted over 15 days prior to deportation, the transfer will be annulled. In fact, as specified below, the relevant decision was taken much earlier and put into practice. The first task of the committee was the goal of liquidating the properties by producing a list of all transactions conducted and after and up to 15 days prior to deportations. The other articles of the temporary law discuss the stages of the liquidation process and the details of how it will be conducted. These articles stated that the commissions will carry out operations such as the collection of receivable accounts or the payment of debts of each person, and it was possible to apply to the court concerning this procedure. So who was supposed to apply to the court? Armenian, an Armenian citizen. Where is he? He was deported. So he was no chance to apply to the court regarding the fate of his or her properties. After all transactions were completed, properties that were not the subject of lawsuits would be sold at auction, and the gains produced would be placed in the accounts of the local treasury directorate in the names of their true owners. Again, detailed record books will be kept about all of this. So, we cannot reach those record books again. Article 5th of the law stated that the court's verdicts could not be appealed. In other words, the decision of a court on the credits and the debits of accounts could not be changed. The purpose of this article can be better understood after realizing that no deported Armenian could be present at any of these courts. The temporary law also declared that a regulation would be promulgated about the formation of the commissions and describe how the provisions of the law will be applied. This regulation agreed upon on November 8, 1915, outlined in detail the protection of the movable and immovable property of Armenians who were being deported and the creation of new committees for liquidation issues and the working principles of the commissions. So these two legal procedures are extremely important because it was the first law and regulation that the Mustafa Kemal government promulgated when he came to power and when he established the Republic of Turkey during the Lausanne negotiations. He reintroduced Union and Progress Party laws in order to keep on liquidation process. So if we make a brief evaluation of the CEP term, we will see in summary, through the laws and the regulation issued during the period of the Union and Progress Party government, a very detailed action plan was presented about what should be done with the properties left by the Armenians, but no legal arrangement whatsoever were presented as to how the values of these properties should be given back to Armenians. 2 points are extremely important about this law, liquidation law, and the regulation, which do not include even a single regulatory provision concerning how the equivalent value of the Armenians' properties will be paid. First, the extent of the properties and wealth that were to be confiscated was widened. This was done in 3 ways. One, it was announced that any type of transaction conducted up to 15 days prior to Armenians' deportation and pertaining their goods and wealth could be annulled. Second, if any type of sequestration decision had been made previously by the court concerning the property of Armenians, it will be annulled and the property will pass to the state. If there was money owed to Armenians by others, it was decided that state would collect this debt directly. In this way, the law blocked any possibility of Armenians collecting what was owed to them from other channels. Second, was announced that the debts owned by Armenians to local and foreign people and organizations will be paid by selling their properties for sure. In this way, any possible intervention of foreign powers, especially Germany, will be prevented. Moreover, and perhaps most importantly, the legal paths for the Armenians to act against these official decisions were completely closed down. In a nutshell, through the laws and regulations during the time of the Union and Progress Party government, as I said, a very detailed plan of action was presented about what should be done with the properties, but no legal arrangements were carried out regarding the values of these properties, how the values should be given back to their original owners. in the eyes of Unionists, from the moment Armenian citizens were deported, they were no longer alive. This mindset constitutes the fundamental aspect of their understanding of the political economy of the Armenian genocide. A number of leading members of the Union and Progress Party, as well as CUP-oriented governors, district governors, seized a great deal of property, especially those belonging to affluent Armenians in many provinces. CUP leaders also used Armenian property and wealth to counter the expenses of the deportation. I would like to move to armistice period. So after the CUP defeat in the war, in the First World War, the government resigned on October 8, 1918. The first cabinet was established by Ahmet İzzet Pasha on 11th of October 1918 until November 4, 1922. 11 governments in all held office. Among the first actions of the government were the initiation of legal proceedings against the members of the Union and Progress Party and the granting of permission for surviving Armenians to return. The most important step regarding this issue was taken on November 4, 1918, when the temporary law of 27th of May 1915, May 27, 1915, it was the deportation law promulgated by the Union and Progress Party. Actually, the deportations were already started by the time this law was passed. It was known as the deportation law, was found to be contrary to the constitution and rescinded. The biggest question concerning the repatriates then was how the movable and immovable property left by the Armenians should be returned to them. The anticipated regulation concerning the return of abandoned properties was finally issued January 12, 1920. In the book we describe, actually we depict this law as Vahdettin regulation, because Vahdettin was the Sultan and he did really great effort to have these laws passed. It contained 33 articles and delimited in detailed fashion how Armenian properties were to return, with Article 13 revoking the liquidation law of 26 September 1915 and the regulation of November 8, 1915. So, January 12, 1920 law annulled all liquidation laws, all CUP laws regarding the confiscation and liquidation of the properties of Armenians. So, within the law they said, if the owners of the properties were not alive, the properties, regardless of whether they were registered in the names of the ministries like Minister of Finance and Minister of Pious Foundation, they would be immediately surrendered to heirs and registered in their names. If no heirs were alive, the properties would remain within the state, Furthermore, if the original owners of the properties did not accept the first sales conducted by the Ministry of Finance and Pious Foundations, the owners could get their properties back. With this regulation, all the practices of the CUP period concerning Armenian properties were revoked, and the return of usurped Armenian properties began. But of course, and then between the late 1920 and 1921, the nationalist forces, the Kemalist forces appeared first in Ankara, again diffused the whole Anatolia, and started Milli Kurtuluş Mücadelesi, National Liberation War against the Allied powers, so-called, but it was against actually the non-Muslim subjects of the Ottoman Empire, just to eliminate them from the whole interior Anatolia en masse. And then they established Ankara government, which declared to oppose any kind of law promulgated by the Istanbul government. So they start not recognizing, acknowledging, for instance, this Vahdettin regulation. The most important laws used to prevent Armenians from entering the interior was the 1869 law of citizenship. So, actually, as of December 1918, Armenians who managed to survive, they start returning their hometowns. But since the Ankara government knew that, they were going to claim their properties back, they start and initiated and also formed new laws. This citizenship law, it was very crucial and significant in terms regarding Armenian properties. the Article 5th and the 6th of this law, which regulate the principles of how Ottoman citizens can acquire citizenship of another country. According to Article 5th, it was only possible for an Ottoman citizen to acquire a different country's citizenship with the permission of the Ottoman government. Without this permission, such a procedure would be considered invalid, and the person concerned will continue to be considered as Ottoman citizen and treated as such. According to the 6th article of the same citizenship law, a person acquiring the citizenship of another country without permission could, if the state wish, have their Ottoman citizenship removed and be prohibited from entering the Ottoman state. The November 1918 passport law, again, added to those who attempt to enter the country will be punished with prison sentences. It's useful to note that this 1869 law of citizenship was issued for a specific purpose. Throughout the 19th century, the great powers were granting Ottoman Christian citizenship by means of their countries, consulates in the Ottoman Empire, so that these people were able to make use of the treaty rights known as capitulations. 1869 law was issued in order to prevent this common practice. During the period being discussed, that law was used to prevent the return of those Armenians. That law was used to prevent return of those Armenians forcibly removed from their homes and stop them from regaining their properties. This practice became much more frequent after 1923, when states such as Britain, United States, relying on the provisions of the Lausanne Treaty, asked for indemnification for the properties of Armenians who had adopted their own citizenships. The Turkish authorities informed these states that this right would only be recognized for people who had informed the Ottoman state before adopting their citizenship, before adopting other citizenships. So you have to let the state know that you are going to get another citizenship. People who had not obtained this permission would still be considered Turkish citizen according to 1869 citizenship law. And therefore, claims of foreign states would be rejected. However, if those people still considered Turkish citizens by Turkey, wanted to come to obtain their properties in person, they would be told that because they adopted other citizenship without giving any notice according to Article 6 of this law, they could not re-enter the country. Excellent law. So, you were deported, you managed to survive, and you ended up in, let's say, Great Britain, and you got Great Britain citizenship, and you heard that there was this law, Vahdettin regulation, so you can claim your properties back, so you want to come to country. But they told you, so okay, you got French citizenship, but you don't let us know. So you are not allowed to get into country. And then they confiscated his properties. So, and okay, if that is the case, I'm a citizenship of France, so there were Lausanne regulations. So according to Lausanne regulation, there were there was a reciprocity. So any Turkish, for instance, any Turkish citizen who got citizenship from Great Britain, he can claim his or her properties from the Great Britain too. So Turkey has a right to claim that. But within this law, any Armenian who got Great Britain citizenship, for instance, on behalf of him, Great Britain asked his or her properties back from Turkey, but Turkey said, okay, he can be your citizen, but according to Article 6, I have a right to not get him in the country. How many of the returning Armenians were able to get back their properties? There is not much information on this, because the archival records are closed in Ottoman and Republican archives. However, it's very interesting. There was a discussion within the Turkish parliament at the time. There was this finance minister, Hasan Fehmi Bey. During the discussions in the Grand National Assembly about annulling the January 12, 1920 regulation, he made an extremely important statement on September 14, 1922. He said that, quote, the implementation of the regulation, so he means regulation in 1920 is 1 out of 10 of the provisions existing in the law. In the law. That is to say that many articles were not implemented. Apparently, 90% of the abandoned properties had not been returned to their owners. And as a matter of fact, this was the reason for the desire to annul the January 12, 1920 regulation, because Ankara government no longer wanted to return any property to the Armenians. On March 16, 1920, Istanbul was occupied and the Sultan officially closed the parliament. The parliament, which began its work in Ankara on 23rd of April 1920, established temporary council of ministers on 25th of April and decreed that all decisions taken by the government in Istanbul after March 16, 1920 were invalid. At the same time, according to this decree, all laws and regulations issued before March 16 remained valid. The meaning of this for confiscated Armenian properties was that the Ankara government accepted all the decrees of the Istanbul government taken prior to March 16 concerning abandoned properties, including the Vahdettin regulation of January 12, 1920. So there was this regulation, January 12, 1920, so you are supposed to return the properties. But on the other hand, there was this National Liberation War, Ankara government was on rise. They already declared that they did not recognize any kind of decision taken by the Istanbul government. The parliament was closed, and they didn't want to return the properties back to Armenians, and they decided to annul this Vahdettin regulation. 14 September 1922, the Grand National Assembly of Turkey in Ankara began to amalgamate procedures connected to the abandoned properties from the time of the Armenian genocide and those in the 1919 and 1922 period. In a session on that day, the Vahdettin regulation was annulled. It was done through an extremely short one sentence, quote, "The regulation dated January 12, 1920 on the properties subject to liquidation of people transported to other places," again, transported to other places, "is abrogated," unquote. Through this decree, so just imagine that they convened the whole parliament, only annul this law only with one sentence, just to promulgate a law with one sentence, in order to abrogate this regulation. Through this decree, which in practice came to be called the abrogation of the property regulation, the 26 September 1915 and the November 8, 1915 liquidation laws of the Union and Progress Party period came into force, and the Republic's process of constructing laws on the basis of the CUP mentality, genocide laws, began. As 7 years has passed since the initial promulgation of these laws, it was necessary to make some adjustments. So why was there a return to Ittihadist laws of the genocide? The aim was clear. The war had been won. There was a good probability that the abandoned properties issue would appear on the agenda of the forthcoming peace negotiations in Lausanne, and Turkey could be asked to return the properties to their owners. Yet Turkey could not even tolerate the existence of Armenians inside in the country, let alone give back their confiscated properties. The state considered the abandoned properties an important source of revenue. However, there was an obligation to give back these properties to their owners according to Vahdettin regulation, which was still valid. Consequently, it was necessary to abrogate this regulation prior to the commencement of the Lausanne negotiations. So together with September 14, 1922, abrogation of the property regulation, liquidation laws of the CUP period entered into validity, or some changes were necessary and to adopt the new conditions. These changes, which were delayed for many reasons, first made through 15 of April 1923 liquidation law. This law, with its 9 article, took as its basis for the 26 September 1915 liquidation law of the Union and Progress Party. Then this 26 September 1915 law and the April 15, 1923 law, with its changes, will be applied together to movable and immovable properties, debts and assets abandoned by those disappearing in any way whatsoever, or leaving a place, or fleeing to foreign and occupied lands, or Istanbul, or connected places. So they just didn't want to omit, just overlook any kind of possibility for Armenians to claim these properties, or to be in front of their properties, standing their properties. So, who? Disappearing in any way whatsoever. So what do you mean by in any way whatsoever? You deported them. Leaving the place. Leaving a place. So, of course, there was a genocide, massacres were going, so that's why he had to leave the place. Fleeing to foreign and occupied lands. Or Istanbul even. So if you are from Adana and you manage to come to Istanbul to save your lives in any way, just more, I mean, to a certain extent, you cannot claim your properties in Adana because you flew to Istanbul. With this change, people who will be covered by the law will be identified as those who are fugitives, lost, or fled to other places. Kaçak göçek, I mean. This will form the basis of all civil lawsuits in the Republican era, and it will primarily Armenians who were referred to by this definition. This definition is still even valid in the Turkish courts in 2016. The April 15 law, first article is just the second article of the 26 September 1915 law, with some changes, which has extraordinary importance for our discussion here. It annulled the provisions in the 1915 law that will return to the original owners the money remaining after the liquidation of their properties, calculating that people who already fled and disappeared would not return. It is that, according to the kind of movable and immovable property, records will be made in the Ministry of Foundation or Finance, and the sum that will remain after liquidation from the values at which the properties will be at rise, revenue in trust in the name of the aforementioned owners. The important point is that in official text, after this date, concerning abandoned properties, the identifications September 26, 1915 and April 15, 1923 will be used together. So it means the consolidation with the İttihat regime was completed. The last step to be taken was the issuance of a regulation concerning the application of this law, and this was a regulation of 29 April 1923. It was exactly the same regulation which was promulgated by the CUP on November 8, 1915. I don't want to get into too much detail, just want to move to Lausanne. So before moving, jumping onto Lausanne, I want to point out that argument as well. The most important point here is that all these transactions were being conducted in the names of the disappeared people. For this reason, the question of what will become of these properties if the disappeared people reappeared is an important one. As a matter of fact, in Lausanne Treaty, a provision was accepted that if these lost people did show up, their properties or the equivalent values of the latter would be returned to them, and the appropriate arrangements were made in Turkish domestic law. The Treaty of Lausanne must be accepted as a partial turning point for the abandoned property issue. The importance of this treaty is that through it, Turkey promised to return to Armenians who continue to live within its boundaries their impounded properties. The Lausanne Treaty provisions are extremely clear. In particular, they guaranteed that restitution will be made for the confiscated properties of the Armenians, particularly in the nationality and property rights and interest sections. However, Turkey did not carry out these provisions. It only gave back the properties of Armenians who remained within Turkey's borders or succeed in entering Turkey unnoticed, while it attempted to confiscate those of Armenians living outside of Turkey. The Lausanne Treaty was interpreted by Turkey in the sense that if the person whose property was confiscated was at the location of his property at the time that the treaty went into effect, I'm talking about August 6, 1923, the property will be returned to its owner. If the person was not in Turkey, he will be considered lost and fleeing, so that the properties of such people will be regulated according to the liquidation law. Consequently, people who left Turkey prior to Lausanne Treaty will not be able to get back their properties in any manner. Turkey blocked this possibility. Thirdly, because Turkey interpreted the Treaty of Lausanne as saying, quote, only if person is with his property would it be given to him, unquote. Armenians who wanted to return to Turkey prior to or after the date of validity of the Lausanne, in order to be with their properties, would not be able to enter Turkey. In order to, you may have listened these stories, you know, maybe from your relatives who managed to enter the Turkey by having stamp in their, you know, passport claiming that, okay, we cannot claim any property, you just want to enter the country, you are not going to claim anything. That kind of arrangement was also carried out at the time. In order to prevent Armenians abroad from coming to the country in order to claim their properties, their entry would be prohibited, and those who did manage to enter would be identified and forcibly expelled. Fourthly, Turkey interpreted in the articles in the section Property Rights and Interests as concerning reciprocal reparations of the damages of citizens of the Allied states who were in Turkey and of those Turkish citizens in other countries. Therefore, it was claimed that these articles did not pertain Armenians found abroad. During bilateral negotiations on reparations, the desire of signatory states to defend the rights of Armenians who now were their own citizens were objected to with the justification that they were still Ottoman citizens. During the years of war, Turkey said only if Armenians had accepted foreign nationality prior to 1914 in accordance with the 1869 citizenship law, by obtaining permission from the Ottoman state, could providing them reparations be acceptable. Anyway, they didn't fulfill this stipulation anyway as well. But it was in the law. While the matter appears quite complicated, it is in fact very simple. Turkey, contrary to a principle of Lausanne, determined not to return the properties of Armenians who ended up outside the country. For this reason, these Armenians were prevented from returning to Turkey, and on the rare occasions that some succeeded in returning, they would be forcibly expelled. We can explain this situation as a type of economic plundering, or as the Turkish finance minister explained during the discussions in the Grand National Assembly, as the desire to close all deficits by confiscated Armenian and Greek properties. It can be argued that the policies followed by Talat Pasha in 1916 aiming at, quote, completely eliminating the Armenian existence, topyekun Ermenileri izale etmek, continued during the Republican period. Indeed, Turkey, in the period following the Lausanne, began to practice a systematic policy of expelling Armenians who remain on its own territories. And after Lausanne, what Turkey did, actually, as Baron Chenyan stated, it was like virtually raise a wall around its borders, like a fortress, to blockade any Armenian from returning to Turkey. The Treaty of Lausanne entered into force on August 6, 1924. The most important change the treaty introduced concerning abandoned properties was the requirement to return to the Armenians who managed to remain in Turkey their properties. It was a law. It was accepted by the government. Consequently, it was necessary to introduce some changes to the abandoned properties laws in order to bring them into accord with the provisions of Lausanne. Turkey faced a serious problem in bringing its laws into accord with Lausanne. what would happen if Armenians living abroad came back individually and began to demand their properties. During the Lausanne, establishing an Armenian homeland or the mass return of Armenians were totally banned. But individual return of Armenians was allowed. So what would happen if they ended up in Turkey? This situation was not clear solution at Lausanne. Turkey had objected the mass return of Armenians and prevented this, while it was forced to accept individual repatriation in principle. Now, in order to prevent these reparations, it was necessary for Turkey to virtually raise a wall around its borders like a forest. So, June 13, 1926 regulation, it was only one of the regulations along with 46 regulations promulgated during the Republican period. These regulations constitute the heart of the issue. That's why I'm gonna try to explain and give some details regarding especially this regulation. The most important regulation issued in the nature of an accommodation to the Treaty of Lausanne was that of June 13, 1926. According to the first article of this regulation, properties abandoned after August 6, 1924, the date the Lausanne Treaty and entered into force within Turkey, would be confiscated. Properties abandoned after August 6, 1924 would be confiscated. The second article said, quote, if confiscation, that is the government officially learning that a property was abandoned, took place prior to 6 August 1924, the procedure will be finalized. The return of confiscated property to its owner was never a topic of concern. Once started, the confiscation procedure has to be completed. The third article of the regulation concerns what will happen if the abandoned status of the properties is learned of by the government after August 6, 1924. There were three alternatives. One, if the owner of this property or his representative is where the property is, the property will be returned to him. If not, it will be managed by the government according to general provisions of the state in the name of owners. Second, if these properties have been given to migrants like immigrants, Muslim refugees coming from Caucasus and the Balkans, although owners are present, the value of the properties at the time they were given to immigrants will be paid to owners. Third, if the properties in question have been sold, the owner can only obtain the sale value on terms of the conditions of the sale. So, but what they did, they introduced citizenship laws, they utilized passport laws, and they also promulgated other regulations to blockade Armenians from returning to Turkey. As Lemkin, I move back to my initial point. As Lemkin points out, the inventor of the notion of genocide, genocide is not only a process of destruction, but also that of construction. By the time genocide perpetrators are destroying one group, they are also constructing another group or identity. Confiscation is one of the most indispensable and effective mechanisms for perpetrators to realize the process of destruction and construction. Therefore, the entire process of confiscation can be evaluated and construed as both an ideological principle and economic motivation. CUP deported Armenians for various reasons, and while deporting them, promised that the government would look after their properties and give them their equivalent values in the new places where they will be resettled. All the promulgated laws and regulations repeated that, it's very important, all regulations repeated that Armenians were the true owners of their properties, and that the state only undertook their administration in the name of the owners. However, the entire legal system was based on deception and a fiction of caring for Armenian wealth and assets. In reality, these laws and regulations were used to eliminate both the material and physical existence of the Armenians in Anatolia. The same practice continued in the Republican era. the Armenians' right to the properties they left behind was repeated in the international treaties signed during this period. Turkey promised to give back the properties to owners who, as of August 6, 1924, were at their properties. Afterwards, Turkey's borders were fortified like a fortress, as I said, and not even a single Armenian was able to enter the country. Though these Armenians, who were not allowed back, were declared to be fugitive and missing. And the process of confiscation of their properties continued. Furthermore, while doing all this in the Ottoman and in the Republican period, it was not and could not be said the Armenians had no right to their properties. Legislation repeated that the Armenians possessed their right to their properties, so that if properties could not be returned to their equivalent values, must be paid, but the same legislation was used simultaneously to prevent this. This was because the goal was to completely remove the Armenian presence in Anatolia. What was occurring was a legal operation of theft. The use of legal system was both an attempt to deny and to legitimize the Armenian genocide under the cover of legality. The legal framework was used to provide a legitimation of what was an act of power and destruction. The law, in particular, the abandoned properties laws, became the most important means for the removal of Armenian economic existence and the erasure of any trace of Armenians from Anatolia. Şaşırmalarla Orhan Özçuk. Just a quick one, I would like to mention that these liquidation laws I was talking about, which enabled the government to liquidate Armenian properties, it was valid until 1988, this law. And this June 1926 regulation has been repealed in 2006, which means they continued liquidation of Armenian, let's say, abandoned properties until 2006. So they realized there was no property left to liquidate, and then they repealed the law. They don't need it anymore.
Yes, any questions?
I'll give you a scenario, it might be true with others also. The example of my grandfather, who was killed during the genocide. And however, my father and 3 of his siblings survived. They accepted Islam. They remained in Malatya, okay, until 1923. So, according to my uncle, who was, well, my father was 5 years old during the genocide. So his brother was about 8 years older. So he was able to understand a few things. Now, up until